The Galactic Council had 47 members. Everyone knew this. It was in every textbook humanity had managed to translate from alien transmissions. 47 species, 47 seats, 47 flags, or whatever each species used in place of flags, hanging in the great chamber of Verath Station, which orbited a dead star at the edge of what the Council called civilized space, and what humans called really, really far away. What the textbooks did not mention was Seat 48. Because the textbooks were translated from Council documents, and the Council had not written about Seat 48 in anything they made public. They had, in fact, worked hard to not write about it at all. The seat existed. It was there, at the end of the curved row, built into the chamber floor like all the others. It was just always empty. Had been empty for as long as anyone alive could remember. If a new council member noticed it during their first session and asked about it, an older member would say something brief and quiet, and the new member would not ask again. The empty seat was not a mystery. It was a decision. It was just not a decision anyone had told Earth about. The transmission came through on a Tuesday. This was important only because Tuesdays at the Farpoint Deep Space Relay Station were slow. Farpoint was a small station, 3 people rotating shifts, parked at the edge of the solar system like a tin can on a very long string. Its job was to capture and log incoming signals from deep space, compress them, and forward them to the main receiving arrays back on Earth. Most of what it caught was noise, cosmic static, the occasional alien commercial broadcast that had been traveling through space for decades and arrived scrambled and strange. On this Tuesday, it caught something else. The signal was tight, direct, and not aimed at Farpoint at all. It had been aimed at a Council internal relay 40,000 kilometers away. It missed. A calculation error somewhere in the transmission chain. A decimal point, a rounding mistake, the kind of thing that happens when you are routing administrative files across 40 light-years of space. The misdirected file hit Farpoint's array at 3:14 in the morning, station time. The technician on duty, a young man named Devo who was eating noodles and watching a documentary about deep-sea fish, almost flagged it as noise. He almost did. But the encoding pattern was not noise. It was structured, clean. It had headers. Devo put his noodles down. It took him 6 hours to crack enough of the encoding to read the headers. The headers said, Galactic Council, closed session transcript, cycle 4471. He read that twice. Then he called his supervisor. His supervisor called her supervisor. Her supervisor called someone in a government building in Geneva who had a very particular job title that most people did not know existed. By the time the full transcript was decoded and translated, a process that took 11 days and involved 17 linguists working in rotation, the contents had already been read by enough people that keeping them quiet was no longer a question of if, but of when. The answer to when was 4 more days. Then it was everywhere. The transcript was 340 pages long in its translated form. Most of it was procedural, debates about trade routes, resource allocation, border disputes between species whose names humans could barely pronounce, standard governance, the kind of thing that would put anyone to sleep. But on page 187, the subject changed. Item 14, Unregistered Species Designation, Sol System, Third Planet. Humanity read page 187, the way a person reads a letter they find in a drawer that was not meant for them. Slowly, then again faster, then a third time, not because they did not understand it, but because understanding it took a moment to settle. The session had taken place 61 years ago. Most of the species represented were long-lived enough that the same individuals who had been in that room were probably still alive. They had gathered to discuss Earth, not to welcome it. Not to begin a process of introduction or preparation. They had gathered to vote. The question on the table: should Seat 48, provisionally designated for the Sol System species colloquially identified as humans, be formally offered? The debate lasted, according to the transcript, 9 hours. Different council members said different things. Some argued that humanity was simply too new, barely a few thousand years of recorded civilization, barely a century of space travel. They were a child species, still figuring out their own planet. Premature inclusion would serve no one. Others argued something harder to read without feeling it in the chest. They said that humanity was not merely young. They said that the pattern of human history, the wars, the weapons, the speed with which they turned knowledge into destruction, suggested a species that would destabilize the Council, not contribute to it. They used a word that translated roughly as uncontainable. They used it more than once. One council member, a then elder named Ethos, according to the record, said very little. His contribution to the debate was 4 sentences. He said that the charter required consent of the designated species before a seat could be permanently closed. He said that no one had asked humanity. He said this was a procedural problem. He said he wished the record to reflect his concern. The vote was unanimous. 47 votes. 47 in favor of leaving seat 48 empty. The seat was not offered. No reason was given to Earth because Earth was not told. The matter was closed, filed, and buried under 61 years of other sessions, until a decimal point error and a young man eating noodles pulled it back into the light. Earth's reaction was not unified. This surprised no one who knew anything about Earth. Some governments were outraged. They called emergency sessions, demanded formal responses, drafted communiques addressed to the Council that no one was sure how to send. There were protests, some angry, some almost festive, humans holding signs that said things like, "We didn't even get to say no," and "Seat 48 is ours, actually." Some governments were embarrassed. The transcript had been translated by now into every major language, which meant everyone could read the parts about human history, the wars, the weapons, the words uncontainable. Some leaders said quietly that perhaps the Council had not been entirely wrong. They did not say this loudly. Some people just sat with it, read the transcript in the middle of the night on their phones, felt something that did not have a clean name, something between hurt and fury and a strange, tired recognition. 61 years. The decision had been made before most of them were born, before their parents were born. The universe had looked at humanity and made a choice, and then gone about its business, and no one had thought to mention it. The United Nations convened a special session. It lasted 4 days and produced a subcommittee tasked with producing a framework for producing a response. The subcommittee met twice and then got into an argument about jurisdictional authority over interstellar communications that was technically interesting and practically useless. This, too, was very human. Dr. Yara Osei watched the UN session on a screen in her apartment in Accra. She was 41 years old. She had spent the last 15 years working as a xenolinguist for a research consortium that advised several governments on alien language analysis. She had translated 11 distinct alien communication systems. She had written 3 books. She had given advice that had shaped 4 official Earth Council communication attempts, all of which the Council had received in silence and never answered. She had a mug of tea going cold on her desk, and a yellow legal pad covered in notes she had been making since the transcript was released. She watched the UN session with the specific expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular conversation to happen and is watching it not happen in real time. On the legal pad, she had written out Article 3 of the Galactic Council founding charter. She had a translation of the charter because translating it was one of the first things she had done when she got access to Council documents, 6 years ago. No one had asked her to. It just seemed like the kind of thing a person should do. Article 3, Clause 9 read, "No seat designated for a registered or provisionally registered species shall be permanently closed or reassigned without the documented consent of that species' recognized governing body." Earth had never given consent, because Earth had never been asked, because the session had been closed and the decision had been buried, which meant, as a strict matter of Council law, the vote was not final. Yara had been sitting with this for 11 days. She had cross-referenced it against 3 other clauses. She had checked the translation 4 times. She was not wrong. She picked up her phone and called her mother. "I'm going to do something," she said. "Good or bad?" Her mother asked. Yara thought about it. Possibly both. "Are you going to eat before you go?" "I'll eat on the way." The freighter was called the Marin Dusk. It was registered to a shipping company that ran cargo between Earth's outer stations and a Keth trading post at the edge of human-surveilled space. It carried industrial solvent, agricultural equipment, and 3,000 units of a processed protein supplement, that smelled powerfully of synthetic cheese. Yara booked passage in the cargo section because the passenger section was full. She packed one bag, clothes, tablet, power cells, a paper notebook because she worked better on paper, 3 boxes of granola bars because she had made this kind of trip before in smaller ways, and she knew the food situation would be unpredictable. She did not tell her employer. Her employer would have felt obligated to tell the government, and the government would have felt obligated to convene a subcommittee, and the subcommittee would have argued about jurisdictional authority until Yara was old and the moment was gone. She filed a personal leave of absence form that cited family reasons, which was not entirely untrue. She considered all of humanity family, in the abstract, catastrophic way that people who care too much about the world tend to. She told her mother. She told her neighbor to water the plant on the kitchen windowsill. She took a transport to the outer station, where the Marin Dusk was docked. The cargo hold was large and mostly empty for this leg of the trip. Metal walls, overhead lighting, crates strapped along the sides. It smelled like solvent and synthetic cheese, and the particular cold that deep space freighters always carried. A cold that came not from temperature, but from the understanding of how much nothing was outside the walls. Yara found a clear space between 2 crates, put down her bag and sat. She pulled out the legal pad. At the top, she had written the names of all 47 council species in their own scripts, then in transliterated form, then with their phonetic pronunciations noted in the margin. Below each name was a short column of information: what they valued, what offended them, what gestures meant what silence meant in each culture, because silence meant something different in all of them, and she had learned long ago that the wrong kind of silence could end a conversation before it began. Below the names she had written, in plain letters, things that are true. They voted without asking us. The charter says they needed consent. They never got it. I have read the whole charter, twice. She looked at the list for a while. The freighter hummed around her, big engines pushing them through the dark. She did not feel brave. Bravery was not the word for what she felt. The word was closer to something like, "This is the thing, and I am the person, and there is no good reason to wait." She had spent 15 years translating messages no one acted on. She had spent 15 years being the person who prepared the ground that other people did not walk on. She had spent 15 years being ready for a door that nobody opened. She was not going to wait for someone to open it. She reached into her bag and took out a granola bar, oats and honey, slightly crushed. She ate it slowly in the humming dark of the cargo hold while the solar system shrank behind her, the sun becoming one light among many, and then fewer, and then just the dark and the stars and wherever all of this was going. She crossed nothing off her list. She memorized everything. Vareth Station did not look like a seat of power. It looked like someone had started building a moon and then kept going past the point where any reasonable species would have stopped. It was not round. It was not any shape that had a clean name. It had been added to over 11,000 years by 47 different species with 47 different ideas about architecture, and the result was something vast and lumped and strange. Towers rising from platforms rising from rings, all of it connected by corridors and docking arms that jutted out at angles that made sense, probably, to whoever had designed them. It was the size of a small moon. It orbited a dead star that gave off no light worth mentioning. The station lit itself from inside, a low amber glow that leaked from thousands of windows and panels, and from a distance it looked almost warm, the way a lantern looks warm when you are standing in a cold field at night. Yara saw it through the small porthole above her crate. She had been on the Marin Dusk. For 19 days, she had eaten all 3 boxes of granola bars by day 14, and had spent the last 5 days eating the freighter crew's communal rations, which were nutritionally adequate and tasted like wet cardboard pressed into different shapes. She had read through her notes so many times that she had stopped needing to look at them. She had slept badly and thought constantly, and done the particular kind of waiting that is not passive at all but feels like holding a spring coiled in your chest. She pressed her hand to the porthole glass. Cold. The station grew as they approached. Then it kept growing. Then it was simply everywhere she looked, filling the view. And the Marin Dusk was a very small thing moving toward a docking arm that was itself bigger than most buildings Yara had ever been inside. She picked up her bag. The docking bay smelled like metal and something floral that was probably a cleaning agent used by whatever species maintained this section. The bay was sized for ships much larger than the Marin Dusk. Their freighter sat in it like a shoe left in a gymnasium. A crew member named Petros, who had been friendly to Yara in the tired, incurious way of people who meet too many strangers to be impressed by any of them, walked her to the bay's exit corridor. "End of the line for us," he said. "We pick up the next load in 6 days. You need a return berth?" "Not yet," Yara said. He looked at her in the way people sometimes looked at her when they had just understood something they probably should have figured out earlier. "You know this station doesn't take walk-ins." "I know," she said. He shrugged. He had clearly decided this was not his problem. "Good luck then." She walked into the corridor alone. The processing terminal was 300 meters down a corridor, wide enough to drive a truck through. The walls were layered, older material underneath, newer panels on top, species after species leaving their mark in building material, and light color, and the specific height at which they had installed their fixtures, so that the corridor felt like a cross-section of history, everything piled on everything else, over 11,000 years. Yara had been to alien-managed stations before, smaller ones, transit hubs on the edge of explored space. She knew how to move, not too fast, not too slow, nothing that could read as aggression or fear. She kept her face neutral, and her bag on one shoulder, and she walked. The processing terminal had 6 windows. 5 of them were occupied by alien officials behind transparent panels. The 6th was closed. The line was short. There were 3 other beings ahead of her, a Keth trader, and 2 beings she could not immediately identify, covered in dark fabric from head to floor, waiting quietly. Yara joined the line. She waited. When she reached the window, the official behind the panel was a Ven, same species as Athos, though much younger, which in Ven terms still meant probably several hundred years old. The Ven had pale silver skin and eyes the color of fogged glass, and an expression that was not unkind, but was extremely practiced. The official looked at her, then looked at whatever identification she had submitted through the ship's docking registration, then looked at her again. "Sol system," the official said. It was not a question. "Yes," Yara said. "Species designation, human." "Yes." The official's expression did not change. They typed something. Read something on their screen. Typed again. A pause. The kind of pause that has weight in it, that is not empty but full of a decision being made, somewhere above the level of the person in front of you. "Your species holds no registration with the Galactic Council," the official said. "That's correct. Observer status requires prior application and approval from a minimum of 3 sitting council members." "I understand. Visitor transit requires species registration or a sponsoring registered member." "I understand that too." The official stopped typing. They looked at Yara with something that was not hostility, but was not warmth either. A kind of careful blankness, the face of someone who has a procedure, and is following it, and does not feel personal about it. "Then you understand," the official said, "that I cannot admit you to the station." "I do," Yara said. "I'd like to file a formal petition under Article 7 of the Council Visitor Protocols, requesting a hold on removal pending administrative review. I have the form." She put it on the tray below the panel. She had filled it out on the freighter, in her paper notebook, then transferred it to her tablet and formatted it correctly. She had the Article 7 citation at the top. She had her name, her credentials, her stated purpose. She had 3 copies. The official looked at the form, looked at Yara. They took the form. She was placed in a waiting room 2 corridors from the terminal. It was not a cell. The door was not locked, but it was clearly a room that had been used many times before for exactly this purpose. A small space with a bench along one wall, a table, a dispenser in the corner that produced water when she pressed it. The water tasted like copper, not dangerously so. Just enough to remind her that it had been processed through systems built by someone who did not have human taste preferences as a design consideration. There were crackers on the table. Small, flat, pale things in an open container. She tried one. It tasted like nothing. Not bad nothing, just the complete absence of flavor, which was its own kind of strange. She sat. She read through her notes. She had read them dozens of times, but she read them again anyway, because reading was something to do, and because she had learned that the 48th time you read something, you sometimes catch what the first 47 missed. She waited. On the second day, a guard brought her a meal that was hot and contained protein, and tasted like something she could not name but which was not unpleasant. She ate it. She thanked the guard, who did not respond but also did not seem offended. On the third day, the door opened and a being walked in who was not a guard. Yara had seen Keth before in photographs and translated videos. She had studied their physiognomy, their body language, their cultural protocols around eye contact and posture. She thought she had a reasonable sense of what a Keth looked like. The Keth who walked into the room was still a shock. 9 feet tall was the measurement. She had known this. But 9 feet of Keth was different from 9 feet of anything else she had encountered. The Keth were built dense, layered in something between skin and armor. A natural exoskeleton in dark plates that shifted slightly when they moved, catching the light. This one had 4 arms, the upper pair held loose at their sides, the lower pair carrying a data device and nothing else. Their face was angular, eyes set wide and dark, and they moved the way very large, very competent things move, without hurry, without waste. They looked at Yara in a way that was probably assessing and definitely thorough. "I am Delegate Sora," the Keth said. Their translated voice came through a small device at their collar, arriving in clean, accented Mandarin, Yara's registered primary language from her docking forms. "I hold enforcement authority on behalf of the Council. I have been assigned to complete your removal from Council space." "I appreciate you coming in person," Yara said. Sora looked at her. That was not a compliment. "I know. I meant it anyway." Sora sat down on the other side of the table. The bench adjusted automatically, calibrated, Yara noted, for multiple species sizes. "Old furniture. Used often. You filed an Article 7 petition," Sora said. "Yes. Article 7 allows a 72-hour administrative hold before removal. That period expires in 11 hours. Yes. After which I am required to remove you. You will be returned to the nearest transit station and flagged as an unauthorized entrant, which will complicate any future visa applications on behalf of your species." Yara nodded. She had known this. She was also running a calculation that she had been running for 3 days, the specific timing of what she needed to happen before 11 hours was up, versus the probability of it happening, versus what she would do if it did not. She reached into her bag and took out a document, printed on actual paper, because she had learned that across species, physical documents carried a different weight than digital ones. Something about the permanence of paper crossed cultural lines in ways she found difficult to explain, but had come to rely on. She put it on the table and slid it to Sora. "I'd like you to read that," she said. Sora did not move to take it. "I am not here to read documents." "I know. I'm asking anyway." A pause. Long enough that Yara thought Sora was going to stand up and leave. Then Sora took the document with one of their lower hands and read it. They read it in about 40 seconds. Then they read it again. Yara watched them read it the second time and said nothing. Sora put the document down. They did not slide it back. "Article 3, Clause 9, Sora said. "Yes. You're arguing that the Council's vote to permanently close Seat 48 was procedurally invalid. I'm arguing that the Charter requires the consent of the designated species before a seat can be permanently closed. Earth was never asked. Therefore, the vote cannot be final under the Council's own law." Sora was quiet. The dark plates of their exoskeleton shifted slightly. Something that Yara's notes suggested could be a thinking gesture, or a discomfort gesture, or both. "The session was 61 years ago," Sora said. "I know. You were not alive. Also correct. You are one person." "At the moment," Yara said. Sora looked at her for a long time. Not the way the processing official had looked at her. Not that practiced blankness. Something else. Something that was trying to decide what category to put her in, and finding that the available categories did not quite fit. They stood, all 9 feet of them, filling the room differently standing than sitting. "I need to make a communication," Sora said. Of course, Yara said. Sora left. The door did not lock behind them. She waited 4 more hours. She drank copper water. She ate crackers that tasted of nothing. She read her notes again, though by now the reading was more ritual than necessity. She was thinking about Athos, the 4 sentences in the transcript. No one had asked humanity. This was a procedural problem. He had been in that chamber 61 years ago. Ven lived long. He was almost certainly still alive, still sitting on the council. She had calculated the probability of Sora's communication reaching someone who had access to someone who had access to Athos at somewhere around 30%. She thought 30% was worth waiting for. She was also thinking about what would happen if it was not 30%. If the 11 hours ran out, and Sora came back with 2 other guards instead of alone. If she was put on a transit freighter back toward human space, flagged as an unauthorized entrant. If the whole thing ended in this room, that smelled like copper and nothing crackers. She thought about it plainly, the way you have to think about bad possibilities when you are the person who makes plans. Not to scare yourself, but to know what it would cost, so that the fear of it does not ambush you later. She decided the cost was acceptable. She had gotten here. She had put the document in front of the enforcement delegate. The argument existed now, on record, in someone else's hands. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, something that had not existed 19 days ago when she was sitting in a cargo hold eating granola bars. Whatever happened next, that was true. The door opened. Sora came back alone. They stood in the doorway for a moment, and their expression, if you knew how to read Keth facial structure, which Yara did, imperfectly, but better than almost anyone else on Earth, was not the expression they had walked in with 3 hours ago. Council Elder Athos has requested a private meeting, Sora said. Yara breathed out slowly through her nose, kept her face level. When? She said. Tomorrow morning, station time. She nodded. I'll need somewhere to sleep. Sora looked at her. Then, in a way that might have been reluctant, and might have been something else, said, I will arrange a room. Yara stood, picked up her bag, put her notebook under her arm. Thank you, she said. Sora said nothing. But they held the door open, and Yara walked through it, into the long, amber corridor of a station that 11,000 years of history had built, heading toward a meeting with someone who had been alive for most of those years. She was still not brave. Bravery was the wrong word. She was ready. She had always been ready. That was a different thing entirely. The room Sora arranged was small and clean, and built for something with slightly different proportions than a human, so the bed was too wide, and the light was set at a frequency a little too blue. Yara adjusted the light. She could not do anything about the bed width. She lay down on one half of it and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would sit across from a being who was 4,000 years old, a being who had helped write the laws she was planning to use, a being who had been in the chamber when that vote was taken, who had said 4 sentences, and then been outvoted 46-1, and then gone home and lived another 61 years while the universe moved on. She thought about those 4 sentences. She had read them so many times, they had become almost like her own words, like something she might have said herself. No one asked humanity. This is a procedural problem. She closed her eyes. She slept better than she had in 19 days. Athos was smaller than she expected. She had been expecting something large, 4,000 years of age and authority, and the weight of a civilization behind every decision. Her mind had built him tall somehow, broad, something that filled a room by existing in it. He was slight, narrow-shouldered, long-fingered, wrapped in pale gray cloth that pooled slightly at his feet. The Ven aged differently than humans. They did not wrinkle or gray or diminish in the ways she was used to reading. What they did was become more still, like something that had been moving for a very long time, and had gradually learned that most movement was unnecessary. He sat across from her, at a low table, in a room she had never been shown on any map of the station, and he was the stillest person she had ever been in a room with. His eyes were the same fogged glass color as the processing officials. Older, though. It was not something she could point to exactly. It was the kind of old that was behind the eyes rather than on the face. He looked at her without speaking for a while. She did not fill the silence. She had learned, across 11 alien communication systems, that the worst thing you could do was fill a silence that was not yours to fill. "You read the charter," he said finally. His translated voice came through a device at his collar, same as Sora's, but his was older. The translation carried a slight delay, a quarter second behind his actual speech, just enough to remind her that the words arriving in her ears were not the words he was making. "Yes," she said. "All of it." "Yes." He was quiet again. She had the sense he was not pausing to think. He had already thought. The pauses were something else. A rhythm he moved in, old and unhurried, that had nothing to do with uncertainty. "I put 4 sentences in the record," he said. "I know. I read them. Most people who read that session do not notice them." "I was looking for them," Yara said. He looked at her. Something shifted in the stillness. Not quite a change of expression, but a change of quality, the way a room changes when a window is opened even slightly. "You came here alone," he said. "Yes. No authority, no title." "I have a title. I printed the lanyard myself." He looked at the lanyard. It said, "Dr. Y. Osei, Xenolinguist, United Nations Liaison." And it had a slightly uneven lamination because she had done it on a home press the night before she left, and the heat setting had been slightly off. Athos looked at it for a moment. "The United Nations sent you?" "The United Nations does not know I'm here." The stillness again. Then, "Sit down, Dr. Osei." She was already sitting. She did not mention this. The meeting lasted 2 hours. It was not a negotiation. It was more like an examination. Athos asked questions and Yara answered them, and he listened to her answers with the full, unhurried attention of someone who had been listening to things for 4,000 years and knew the difference between a person speaking and a person meaning what they said. He asked about the charter argument. She walked him through it, clause by clause. He did not seem surprised by any of it. He asked about Earth's current political structure, which governments had responded to the transcript, what the public reaction had been. She told him honestly, including the part about the subcommittee and the jurisdictional argument, because she had decided before she arrived that honesty was not just the ethical choice but the strategic one. A being 4,000 years old had heard too many careful, shaped answers to be impressed by one more. He asked why she had come alone. She thought about that for a moment. "Because if I waited for consensus," she said, "we would still be waiting when I was dead." He was quiet. "And because if I came with an official delegation," she continued, "they would have refused it at the dock and sent it home, and that would have been the end of it. One person is easier to say yes to than a committee. One person is also easier to say no to." "I know," she said. "I'm betting on the yes." He looked at her for a long time. "I can offer you a provisional hearing," he said. 48 hours from now. A closed session. 7 council members. Not the full body. You will have the opportunity to present your case." She felt the thing in her chest that she had been holding coiled for 19 days release very slightly, not all the way, just enough. "Thank you," she said. "Do not thank me yet," Athos said. 3 of the 7 members in that room voted in the original session. They have not changed their position in 61 years. "I know," she said, "and my ability to influence the outcome is limited. I can open the door. I cannot push you through it. I understand." He stood. She stood. He looked at her lanyard one more time, not unkindly. "You have 48 hours, he said. Sora found her in the corridor outside. This was not a coincidence. Sora, Yara had come to understand, did not end up places by coincidence. She moved with the deliberate economy of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had already decided what they were going to do when they got there. "The hearing was approved," Sora said, not a question. "Yes." Sora fell into step beside her. They walked. The corridor curved, long and amber-lit, past doors that Yara did not have access to, and junctions that led to parts of the station she had not seen. "You have 48 hours to prepare," Sora said. "I have my notes. Your notes cover species vocabulary and cultural protocol. The hearing requires legal argumentation in a format the Council will recognize." Yara glanced at her. I know the format. The 7 members you will face tomorrow. 4 of them respond to historical precedent. 2 respond to procedural logic. 1 responds to almost nothing, but she listens very carefully, and her vote is the most important, because she has never voted with the majority and never voted against it without reason. A pause. Her name is Councillor Dreva Ushet. She is Drevany. Do not make eye contact for more than 4 seconds at a time. They read sustained eye contact as aggression. Yara stopped walking. Sora stopped a step later and turned. Why are you telling me this? Yara said. Sora looked at her with the same expression she had used in the waiting room, that quality of trying to find a category and not quite finding one. I have removed 34 unauthorized parties from council space, Sora said. In 34 cases, the party arrived without preparation, without legal basis, and without a reasonable argument. They were removed, and the situation resolved cleanly. A pause. You arrived with a charter argument that Athos himself flagged 61 years ago, and no one has acted on since. That is not the same situation. So you're helping me because the argument is sound. I am telling you that Dreva Ushet does not like prolonged eye contact, Sora said. What you do with that information is your business. She walked on. Yara stood in the corridor for a moment, then she followed. They worked through the night. Station night, which was marked not by darkness. The station's internal lighting did not change much, but by a drop in ambient noise, fewer beings moving in the corridors, a quality of quiet that settled into the walls. Sora did not sit with her and coach her. That was not what happened. What happened was that Sora walked past her room twice with a data device, and both times left something on the table near the door. A summary of the 7 members' recent voting records, and then a document Yara did not recognize until she read the header, which told her it was the record of the last species admitted to the council, 340 years ago, including the format and structure of that species' successful hearing presentation. She read the document 3 times. She rebuilt her notes. She did not sleep. The hearing room was smaller than she had imagined. She had pictured the great chamber, the full council, 47 seats, the flags, the scale of 11,000 years of governance made physical. Instead, she was in a room that held 1 curved table with 7 chairs behind it and 1 chair across from them, alone, with a small surface beside it for her materials. 7 beings sat at the table. She had studied all of them. She recognized them now by the physical details she had memorized, the height and coloring of each species, the specific delegation markers they wore, the way each of them sat. Athos was at the far left. He gave no sign of recognition. She had not expected one. Dreva Ushet was in the center. A Drevany, compact, gray-green, with large dark eyes that caught the light in a way that was slightly unnerving if you were not prepared for it. Yara was prepared for it. She looked at the counselor's face, held it for 3 seconds, then shifted her gaze to the left, then back. 3 seconds. Away. She had practiced this on the walkover. A being she recognized as Councillor Herath, a Keth elder who had been in the original session 61 years ago, looked at her the way she imagined someone looked at a recurring problem they had hoped would not recur. No one spoke first. This was protocol. The petitioner spoke first. Yara stood. "Thank you for hearing me," she said. "I will be brief." She had decided on brief. She had 45 minutes allocated. She planned to use 20. She had learned across 15 years of working with alien communication that nothing communicated confidence like not taking all the time you were given. She made the argument in 3 parts. First, the Charter, Article 3, Clause 9, the requirement for consent, the absence of any record of Earth being asked. She read the clause. She read the relevant section of the session transcript where the vote was taken. She said, plainly, that under the Council's own founding law, the vote was procedurally incomplete. She watched them as she spoke. Athos was still, which she expected. 2 others, the ones Sora had identified as responding to procedural logic, were paying close attention, the particular attention of people who are checking her work in real time. Herath's expression did not change. Dreva Ushet listened. Second, history. She had found 4 cases in the Council archives, public archives, available to anyone who looked, where species had been excluded or marginalized without proper procedure, and where that exclusion had later cost the Council significantly. She named them. She did not editorialize. She stated what had happened and what it had cost, and moved on. She watched Herath during this section. A small thing happened in the Keth elder's posture, not much. A degree of shift, she noted it. Third, the ask. She did not ask for full membership. She did not ask for voting rights. She asked for a trial period of 10 years. One representative. Observer status only. No vote. The right to sit in the chamber and listen. 10 years, she said. That's all. At the end of 10 years, you evaluate. You decide whether the presence of a human representative in this chamber has been harmful or not. If it has, you end the trial, and the procedural question is still on the table to be resolved properly. If it has not, you have 10 years of actual evidence instead of 61 years of assumption. She sat. The room was quiet. The questions came for 40 minutes. She answered them all. Some were procedural. 3 counselors who wanted to test the charter argument from different angles. She held. The argument was sound and she knew it was sound, and the knowing gave her something solid to stand on. Herath asked her why Earth had not made this argument sooner. She said, honestly, that Earth had not known about the session until 11 days before she boarded a freighter. She said that the moment Earth knew, she had come. You, personally, Herath said. It was not quite a challenge, more like something being verified. Me, personally, she agreed. Dreva Ushet asked one question. One, in the full 40 minutes. She asked it near the end, in a voice that was quiet enough that the translation device had to work slightly harder. If this chamber granted your request, and the 10 years proved unsatisfactory, she said, would your species accept removal without dispute? Yara thought about this honestly. I can't promise what my species would do, she said. I can tell you what I believe. I believe that a species that came here through proper process would leave through proper process. She paused. I also believe that a species that was excluded without proper process, and discovered it, and was then excluded again without proper process. That's a different situation. That's not a promise I can make on their behalf. Dreva Ushet looked at her for 4 seconds. Yara counted. Then the counselor looked away. The deliberation was private. Yara was moved back to the waiting room. The same one, the copper water, the nothing crackers. She sat. She did not pace. She had never been a pacer. Pacing was for people who thought movement helped, and she had learned that movement did not help, that the only thing that helped was to sit in the middle of the thing and wait for it to be over. An hour passed. Sora came to the door. Yara read the answer in the way the Keth moved before she was through the door, a specific quality of stillness that was different from the stillness of good news. The vote was 4-3, Sora said, against. Yara breathed. 4-3. Against. 23 hours on the station, and 48 hours of preparation, and 15 years of work that had led to this moment, and the answer was 4-3 against. She breathed again. Which 4? She said. Sora told her. 3 of them she had expected. The 4th was a surprise, a younger counselor she had thought was persuadable. She filed that away for later, for the version of later that might still exist. The decision will be logged, Sora said. You will be given 24 hours before removal proceedings begin. Yara nodded. She was already thinking. I want to make a statement for the record, she said. Sora looked at her. The hearing is closed. The record is still open until the decision is logged. I have the right to submit a statement of response under the same Article 7 that kept me here this long. I looked it up. A pause. You looked it up. On the walk over, I had time. Sora said nothing for a moment. Then, I will inform the clerk. The statement was 2 sentences. She submitted it in writing, in the council's formal administrative language, which she had been able to read imperfectly for 3 years, and had spent the last 6 hours on the freighter practicing into something closer to correct. It read, I note for the record that the previous vote on this matter was taken without the knowledge or consent of the species it concerned. I further note that the last time this council voted 4-3 on a species exclusion, that species built the station you are currently sitting in. She was referring to the Merit. She had found them in the archive during her 48 hours of preparation. A species excluded from the council 800 years ago by a 4-3 vote, on grounds that they were too technologically aggressive. They had gone home and built, among other things, the power core that ran Vareth Station, because the Council had eventually needed them after all, and had come back to ask. The Marat had said yes, because they were not petty, and they had built the power core, and it had been running for 700 years without a fault. She was not sure anyone on the current council knew this. She was fairly sure at least one of them was about to find out. She was back in the waiting room when Sora returned. Not 24 hours later, 4 hours later. Councillor Dreva Ushet has submitted a formal amendment request, Sora said. Yara looked up. An amendment request suspends the log decision pending a procedural review, Sora said. It does not reverse the vote. It delays finalization for 90 days, while the amendment is examined. 90 days, Yara said, during which time your removal is also suspended. Yara was quiet for a moment. She was doing the math of it. What 90 days meant, what could happen in 90 days, what she would need to do, and who she would need to reach, and whether the thing she was beginning to see the shape of was actually possible, or only looked possible from where she was standing. Dreva Ushet, she said. She voted against. Yes, Sora said, but she filed the amendment. Yes. Yara thought about the one question the Dravani counselor had asked, about whether humanity would leave without dispute. About the answer Yara had given, honest, unpolished, neither a promise nor a threat. She thought about 4 seconds of eye contact held, and then released. I need to send a message to Earth, she said. That can be arranged, Sora said. And I need more crackers. The ones that taste like nothing. I've gotten used to them. Sora looked at her. Yara looked back. The crackers, Sora said. I will see what I can do. She wrote the message to Earth that night. It was not addressed to any government. It was addressed to a general public communications channel, the kind of address that would be picked up by media relays and distributed broadly, because she had long since given up on the idea that governments moved at the speed this situation required. The message was short. She described where she was and what had happened and what 90 days meant. She did not editorialize. She did not tell anyone what to do. She ended it with the merit. The story of them, excluded, dismissed, built the power core anyway, asked back eventually, said yes. She included the council archive reference number. She hit send. She put down her tablet. She ate a nothing cracker in the blue-white light of a room built for someone else, on a station that was 4,000 years older than her civilization, at the edge of a space that had decided not to include her, and had not quite managed to make that decision stick. She started writing the next brief. The message reached Earth in 11 hours. By hour 14, it had been read by enough people that calling it contained was like calling a river contained by pointing at the banks. By hour 20, it was on every major news channel in every language that had a major news channel. By hour 36, 3 governments had issued formal statements, 9 had issued informal ones, and a retired professor of interstellar law at the University of Cape Town had posted a 40-minute video breaking down the merit precedent that had been watched 11 million times. The professor had found the council archive reference number Yara included and pulled the full record. He had read the whole thing on camera, in real time, stopping occasionally to say things like, extraordinary, and they actually built the power core, and once, very quietly, she found this in 48 hours. Yara did not see any of this for 6 days, because the station's connection to Earth's communication networks was routed through Council relay infrastructure, and Council relay infrastructure was not designed for the volume of signal that Earth was suddenly trying to push through it. The system did not crash. It just became very slow and very strange, like a door that had been built for one person being used by a crowd. When Yara's feed finally stabilized, and she caught up on 6 days of messages, she sat with her tablet for 2 hours reading, and did not speak. Then she went to find Sora. They're coming, she said. Sora was in a corridor near the docking administration office, reviewing something on a data device. She looked up. Her expression was the careful neutral she used when she already knew what was about to be said. We are aware, Sora said. How many requests have come through docking? Sora looked at her for a moment. 31 transit applications in the last 4 days, Species designation, human. Stated purpose, council business. Yara absorbed this. Transit applications, not visitor requests. Correct. Transit through council space requires only species registration, which humans do not have, and a sponsoring registered member. A pause. 6 of the applications were co-signed by a Keth trading consortium with registered member status. Yara looked at Sora. Sora looked at her data device. A Keth trading consortium, Yara said. A legitimate registered entity, Sora said, not looking up. With full co-signing rights under council transit law. Yara said nothing for a moment. She was thinking about the jazz concert she had read about in the messages. Someone had apparently organized a human musician to perform in the station's common atrium, and that performance had drawn a crowd of several species. She was thinking about which species had a tradition of music as diplomatic gesture. She was thinking about the Keth Trading Consortium with registered member status that had apparently materialized in time to co-sign 31 transit applications. I see, she said. The applications are being processed, Sora said. It may take several days. Of course. There is nothing I can do to expedite them. I wouldn't expect you to, Yara said. They looked at each other. Sora's expression remained perfectly neutral. Yara kept hers the same. Thank you, Yara said. I haven't done anything, Sora said. I know, Yara said, and left. They arrived over the following 10 days. Not all at once. The transit approvals came through in batches, and the travel times varied depending on which freighters people had managed to book passage on. But they came steadily, in a stream that the docking bay had not been designed to process at this volume, and was managing anyway, because the volume was still small enough that managed was the right word. Barely. Yara met each group at the docking bay. This was not required. No one had asked her to. She did it because someone needed to. Because the first thing any of them saw when they cleared docking should be a human face and a calm voice. Because the worst possible outcome of the next 84 days was humanity arriving on Verath Station and behaving in ways that confirmed every concern the council had ever had. She had written a set of guidelines before the first group arrived, not rules. She had no authority to enforce rules. Guidelines, suggestions. She had distributed them through the same communication channel she had used for her original message. The guidelines were short. Move calmly. Speak quietly. When in doubt about a cultural protocol, wait and watch before acting. Do not film council members without permission. Do not eat in formal spaces. Do not touch anything that is not clearly designated for public use. If you are unsure whether something is clearly designated for public use, assume it is not. She had ended the guidelines with, "We are guests. We did not come here to prove the council right about us. We came here to prove them wrong. Those are the same behavior with different intentions. Keep the intention clear." She did not know how many people had read the guidelines, but she watched the humans come off the freighters, and she watched them move through the station, and most of them moved the way she had asked. Careful, attentive, curious without being aggressive. Most. The group that arrived on the 9th day included a marine biologist from Oslo, a retired Kenyan judge, a food systems researcher from Bangladesh, 3 graduate students in xenocultural studies who had pooled their research grants to pay for passage, a documentary filmmaker who had promised Yara personally in a message that she would not film anything without explicit permission and had so far kept that promise, and a woman in her 60s named Margit, who had spent 40 years as a primary school teacher in Kerala and had written the essay. Yara had read the essay on the Marin Dusk. It had been shared widely enough that she had seen references to it before she saw the thing itself. It was not a legal argument or an academic paper. It was a personal essay, written simply, about what it felt like to teach children about the galaxy for 40 years, and then discover that the galaxy had already decided what to do with them before the children were born. It was the most read piece of writing about the situation on Earth, more read than the original transcript, more read than the legal analyses or the political commentaries or the professor's 40-minute video. Yara had cried reading it on the freighter, in the dark of the cargo hold, which she had not expected and which she had not told anyone. She met Margit at the docking bay. The woman was small, white-haired, carrying a canvas bag and wearing a lanyard that said, Observer. In 7 languages which she had made herself. Dr. Osier, she said. Margit, Yara said. Your lanyard. Margit looked down at it. I saw yours in the photographs. I thought it was a good idea. It's a very good idea, Yara said. They walked into the station together. The jazz musician's name was Kwame. He was from Accra, same as Yara, which she learned only when he introduced himself, and which she filed away as either a coincidence or the universe being slightly on the nose about things. He had arranged the concert himself, contacted the station's event management office, discovered that the common atrium had an open booking policy for cultural performances by registered transit visitors, booked a 2-hour slot, and showed up with a keyboard that he had carried as personal luggage across 40 light-years of space. The common atrium was a large open space near the center of the station's habitable ring, used primarily for commercial exchange and informal gathering. It had high ceilings and ambient sound absorption and bench seating in concentric rings around a central floor. Kwame set up in the center and played for 2 hours. Yara was not there for the beginning. She heard about it afterward, from 4 different people, each of whom described it differently: the sound, the response, which species had gathered, and in what numbers, and what their body language had suggested. She assembled the accounts the way she assembled everything, carefully, comparatively, watching for where they converged. They converged on this. By the end of the first hour, there were beings from 9 species sitting in the atrium. By the end of the second, 16. Some of them stayed after the music stopped. Some of them spoke to Kwame. One of them, a young Ven, barely a few hundred years old, which in Ven terms was practically an infant, sat near the front for the entire 2 hours with the expression of someone encountering something they did not have a category for and were not trying to force into one. Yara heard this and thought about Athos, about the stillness that came from things being put into categories over a very long time, about what it might look like to meet something that did not fit. She did not know if the concert changed anything. She suspected it changed something she could not measure, which was different from not changing anything. The stowaway arrived on day 17. Yara got the notification from docking security. A miner, unaccompanied, discovered in the cargo hold of a supply freighter from the outer relay stations. Species, human. Age, 12. Name, Priya Chandrasekaran. Home, Chennai, India. She had apparently mailed herself. Not literally. What she had done, as best as the docking security report could reconstruct, was identify a youth cultural exchange program that had a registered transit agreement with the station, enroll herself in it without parental knowledge, and then travel on the exchange freighter without being assigned to the exchange program group, which technically made her a stowaway, though the security report noted that the distinction between enrolled and non-enrolled participants had not been well enforced on that particular freighter, which was a problem for the exchange program to sort out. The security report flagged her as an unaccompanied minor and referred her to Yara as the closest thing to a human point of contact the station had. Yara went to the docking bay. Priya was 12, in the way that some 12-year-olds are 12. She looked her age, small and dark-haired, and wearing a school backpack that had a sticker of a cartoon spaceship on it, but her eyes were the eyes of someone who had thought very carefully about a decision before making it, and was not surprised to be facing its consequences. "You're Dr. Osei," she said. "I am," Yara said. "You're a stowaway." "Technically, I was enrolled in the exchange program." "Technically, you were not in the exchange program group." Priya considered this. "That's more of an administrative issue." Yara looked at her for a moment. The backpack, the spaceship sticker, the careful, unfrightened eyes. "Where are your parents?" she said. "Chennai. They think I'm at my grandmother's." "Your grandmother?" "Also in Chennai. I left her a note." She paused. "I left my parents a note too. I explained everything." "Priya," Yara said, "how long have you been planning this?" "Since the transcript came out," she said. "That was 11 weeks ago. I needed time to research the exchange program and the transit route, and figure out the cargo hold layout of the supply freighters." 11 weeks. The girl had spent 11 weeks planning this while Earth's governments were still arguing about subcommittees. "Come on," Yara said. We need to call your parents. Can I see the station first? No. Some of it? Priya. She followed. But she looked at everything as they walked. The walls, the corridor architecture, the species passing them, each one a different shape and size and way of moving through space. She looked the way Yara had looked when she first arrived, except without the practiced neutrality, just open, taking it in. Yara called her parents from her room. The conversation was difficult. Her mother cried. Her father was very quiet in the way that meant he was either furious or terrified, and probably both. Yara explained the situation, explained that Priya was safe, arranged for a return transit berth in 5 days on the next freighter heading toward human space. Priya sat on the floor with her backpack in her lap and said nothing during the call. When it was over, she looked at Yara. I read the hearing transcript, she said. It's not public, Yara said. It leaked, Priya said. Also the professor's video, and your guidelines, and Margit's essay. She paused. You cried reading the essay. Yara looked at her. That is not public information. You mentioned it in a message reply to someone, and they put it in an article. Priya's expression was not unkind. Are we going to get the seat? Yara was tired, 53 days into 90, and she was tired in a way she had not been since the first week on the freighter. The specific tiredness of a person who has been carrying a thing carefully for too long. I don't know, she said honestly, but they know our name now. They won't forget it. Priya thought about this for a long time, a real long time, the kind of pause that a 12-year-old with something to say holds while she makes sure she has it right. That's not a yes, she said. No, Yara agreed. But you think it's better than a yes. Yara looked at her. Because a yes right now could get taken back, Priya said. But knowing our name, that stays, right? Yara was quiet for a moment. Go to sleep, she said. You have a tour of the atrium tomorrow. I'll arrange it. I thought you said no. I said no tonight. She stood. Tomorrow you can see some of it. Priya smiled. It was a full, uncomplicated smile, the kind that 12-year-olds had before the world taught them to hold things back. Yara turned off the light and went back to her own room and sat with the brief she was writing. On day 68, 3 sitting council members announced retirement. This was not unusual. Council members served long terms, but they were not permanent, and resignations and retirements happened. What was slightly unusual was the timing, and what was more unusual was that all 3 announcements included, in their formal statements, a passage about the importance of generational renewal in governance and the value of perspectives shaped by the current era rather than past ones. It was the most diplomatic possible way of saying, the world has changed and perhaps the people making decisions about it should reflect that. Their successors were named within the week. 2 were from species that had sent quiet, unofficial communications to Yara's channel over the past 2 months. Not supportive exactly, but curious, asking questions, wanting to understand. The 3rd successor was a young Ven who Yara recognized, with something that felt like a held breath finally released, as the being who had sat in the front row of the atrium for the entire jazz concert. She did not tell anyone about the 3rd one. She wrote it in her notebook and then closed the notebook and sat with it privately, the way you sit with something that is not yet real and might not become real, and which you are therefore afraid to want too openly. Sora found her the next morning. The amendment review is closing, Sora said. Dreva Ushet has submitted her findings. A new vote will be called within the week. Which way does it go? Yara said. Sora looked at her with the expression she had been using since the waiting room, the one that had never quite found its category. I think, Sora said carefully, that you should be in the chamber when the vote is called. Yara understood what this meant. It was not a prediction. It was something else, the smallest possible statement of a thing that could not be said directly by a person whose job required neutrality, and who had been not quite helping for 90 days. I'll be there, Yara said. Priya had gone home 3 weeks ago on the scheduled freighter. She had sent one message since then. It said, I told my class about the jazz concert. My teacher asked how I knew so much about the station. I said I read about it. You're welcome for not getting you in trouble. Yara had read the message 4 times. She had not replied yet. She was still thinking about what to say. She thought about it now, in the amber corridor, Sora's footsteps fading in one direction and the chamber in the other. She thought, because you were right, about all of it, names and what they stay. She turned toward the chamber. She walked. The vote was called on a Wednesday. Station time did not have Wednesdays. Yara had long since stopped tracking Earth days with any precision. The station ran on a cycle slightly longer than 24 hours, and she had adjusted to it the way the body adjusts to things when it has no other choice. But she knew it was Wednesday back home because Priya had sent her a message that morning that said, "It's Wednesday. Good luck. My whole class is watching." And then, after a pause that Yara could feel even through the text, "I told them you'd be okay. Was that okay to say?" Yara had read it in the corridor outside the chamber. She had written back, "Yes, that was okay to say." Then she had put her tablet in her bag and walked in. The full chamber was different from the 7-member hearing room. She had known it would be different. She had read descriptions of it, seen translated diagrams, studied the seating arrangement and the protocols. None of that had fully prepared her for the scale of it, not just physical scale, though it was physically enormous, the curved ceiling high enough that the upper section dissolved into ambient light, the floor wide enough that the far wall was a distance rather than a surface. The 47 seats rose in a curved arc, tiered, each one sized for its occupant, so that the arc was irregular in a way that was almost organic, fitted to the bodies of 47 species, the way a coastline is fitted to the sea. Seat 48 was at the end of the arc. Lower than some, same height as others. It was built in the style of the Dravani, who had administered this section of the chamber when the station was first constructed. Wide, flat, slightly reclined, not built for a human body. It was empty. It had always been empty. Yara sat in a gallery section to the left, observer space, marked for non-members attending open sessions. She was not the only one there. 12 other humans had gallery passes today. The marine biologist, the judge, the graduate students, Margit, in her handmade lanyard, Kwame, who had stayed long past his original transit permission because the Keth Trading Consortium had continued to find reasons to extend it. They sat quietly. Yara had not told them to be quiet. They had decided it themselves. Below, the 47 council members filed in. The 3 new members were among them, different from their predecessors in small ways that only someone who had studied the seating chart would notice. The young Ven sat in a seat near the center and arranged themselves with the careful stillness of someone trying very hard not to look like they were trying hard. Athos was in his usual seat. He had not looked up at the gallery. He did not look up now. Dreva Ushet sat in the center. She looked at her data device, then set it down, then folded her hands on the surface in front of her in a gesture that Yara recognized from her notes as Dravani formality, the body arranging itself for something that mattered. The chamber quieted. The session was called to order. The amendment review was presented first. Dreva Ushet delivered it herself, which was not required but was not unusual for a counselor who had initiated the amendment. She read it in the formal council language, which Yara followed in translation through a small earpiece the station had provided to gallery observers. The review was 20 minutes long. It covered the procedural history, the original vote, the charter argument, the hearing, the 90 days. It was precise and dry and utterly without editorial flourish, which in the context of council formal language was its own kind of statement, because the language had room for flourish, and she had chosen not to use it. At the end, Dreva Ushet said, "The amendment finding is as follows. The original vote of Cycle 4471 was procedurally incomplete under Article 3, Clause 9 of the Founding Charter. The vote cannot be considered final. A new vote is required." She sat. The chamber was quiet for a moment. Then the new vote was called. Yara had been in rooms where things were decided before. Smaller rooms, smaller decisions. She knew the particular quality of a moment where something that has been uncertain for a long time is about to stop being uncertain, how the air in the room seemed to change pressure slightly, how her own body registered it before her mind caught up. The vote was not done the way human votes were done. No raising of hands, no call and response. Each council member submitted their vote through a device on their desk, privately. and the result was compiled and displayed when all votes were in. It took 4 minutes. The result appeared on a panel at the center of the chamber. 31 in favor, 16 against. Yara breathed. Beside her, Margaret made a sound that was not quite a word. The marine biologist put her face in her hands. The judge sat very straight and very still with his eyes closed. The graduate students were gripping each other's arms. Kwame looked at the panel for a long time, then looked at his hands, then looked at the panel again. Yara looked at seat 48. It was still empty. For now. The formal ceremony was 3 days later. It was brief and procedural, which was appropriate. This was not a celebration, not from the council's side. It was a legal formality, the completion of an administrative process that had been incomplete for 61 years. A 10-year trial period. 1 representative, no voting rights, observer status. The chamber was full for it. All 47 current members present, plus gallery observers, plus a translation relay that was broadcasting to every council species home networks, and, through an arrangement that Sora had apparently facilitated without being asked, and without explaining herself, to Earth's communication channels as well. Yara walked in alone. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing for most of the past 90 days, because she had packed 1 bag, and she had been here longer than she planned, and the clothes still held up. She had her lanyard, still slightly uneven in its lamination. She had her notebook under her arm. She walked to seat 48 and sat down. It was too wide. The armrests were at the wrong height. The angle of the backrest was calibrated for Dravani's spinal structure, which meant it hit her at the shoulder blades in a way that was not comfortable, but was not unbearable either. The seat surface was slightly too deep, so her feet did not quite reach the floor in the way the seat was designed for. She sat in it anyway. She sat in it the way you sit in something that does not fit yet, that you are going to learn to fit in, that is going to change shape slightly over time, and so are you. She adjusted the armrests to the highest setting available. She put her feet flat on the floor, a few centimeters forward of natural. She opened her notebook on her knee. Athos looked at her from across the arc, still, unhurried. She gave him a small nod. He did not return it, because this was a formal session and formal sessions did not have small nods in them. But something in his stillness changed. The quality of it, the particular texture of a person watching something they have been waiting for, without fully knowing they were waiting. The session was called to order. Yara listened. The first session she observed covered a trade dispute between 2 species, the Merit and the Henori, over mineral rights to a moon, in a system well outside human-surveilled space. The Merit presented their claim first. They were orderly about it, precise, supported by survey data going back 300 years. The Henori countered. The argument was technical and dry, and went on for the better part of 2 hours. 40 minutes in, one of the graduate students who had stayed past their transit period and somehow acquired a permanent observer pass, slipped Yara a folded note. She opened it under the edge of the table. It said, "We've been mining that moon." She wrote back, "I know." She had found the notation in a transit commerce report 3 weeks ago, a human-registered extraction company operating under a shell name through a Keth subsidiary, mining that moon for 60 years, under documentation that would not survive close scrutiny. She had verified it twice. She had told no one. She had written it in her notebook and underlined it, and then written beside it. Not yet. Not yet, because the seat was not hers when she found it. Not yet, because raising it before she had any standing would be dismissed as deflection. Now she had standing. Now was the time. She said nothing during the session. She wrote everything down. After the session, she filed a formal disclosure statement to the council clerk. She disclosed the mining operation, the company name, the 60 years of unauthorized extraction. She attached the transit commerce report. She recommended the council open a review. The clerk received the statement without expression, which was their job. Yara walked out of the chamber and went back to her room and sat on the bed that was too wide and looked at the ceiling. She thought about what Priya had said, about names and what stays, about the difference between a yes that can be taken back and a truth that cannot be untaken. She had just made their presence on this station harder. She had disclosed something that no one had asked her to disclose, something that an expedient person would have buried, something that would cost human commercial interests significant money and create significant legal complexity. She had done it in the first session. She had done it in public. She had filed it as a formal record. This, she thought, was probably more important than the vote. The 10 years were not clean. She had not expected clean. She had expected human, which was what she got, complicated and contradictory and occasionally mortifying, interspersed with moments of such clarity and goodness that they made everything else worth it. There was the journalist in year 3, who filmed a restricted council corridor without permission and published the footage before anyone could stop her. Yara appeared in the chamber the following session and apologized formally, in the council's language, without excuse. She described what had happened, described the steps being taken, and said plainly that she could not promise it would never happen again, but could promise that it would be taken seriously every time. The chamber was quiet when she finished. Herath, the Keth elder who had been in the original session, who had looked at her 61 years ago in that first hearing, with the expression of a recurring problem, said, "The apology is noted." That was all. But Herath had never said anything directly to her before. She wrote it in her notebook that night. There was the general in year 7, who was absolutely not supposed to be in council space and was found there anyway, on what he later described as a personal research mission, which the subsequent investigation established was a personal research mission that had involved unauthorized scanning of council defense infrastructure. Yara spent 3 months in a side room with council legal representatives working through consequences. The general was sanctioned. Human access to 3 transit routes was temporarily suspended. Yara apologized again, longer this time, more detailed. She did not resign. She had considered it. She had decided that resigning was a way of making the problem about her, when the problem was about something larger that needed to be addressed rather than escaped. After the resolution, Dreva Ushet requested a private meeting, the first since the amendment hearing. She said only this: "In 40 years of council membership, I have watched 31 species face their first serious procedural violations, every one of them either minimized or deflected." A pause. "You did neither," Yara said. "We knew what we were asking to be part of when we asked." Dreva Ushet looked at her for exactly 4 seconds, then away. The vote at the end of the 10 years was not close. 41 in favor, 6 against. Full membership, permanent status, voting rights. Seat 48 was refitted. It took 6 weeks. New materials, new dimensions, calibrated to human anatomy from measurements Yara provided. The armrests at the right height, the seat surface the right depth, the backrest angled correctly, the floor contact point adjusted. When it was finished, Yara looked at it for a long time. Then she stepped aside. She had known she was going to do this before the vote was called. She had known it, she thought, since the cargo hold of the Marin dusk, eating granola bars in the dark, though she would not have been able to articulate it then. She had opened a door. She was not the door. The person who walked through it permanently should be someone shaped by what was on the other side. Someone who had grown up with this, who had watched the hearing transcripts the way other children watched things that thrilled them, who understood the weight of it as something inherited rather than discovered. She nominated Rajan. He was 28. He had studied xenodiplomacy because of the hearing. He had read Yara's original charter brief, the way a person reads something that changes what they think is possible. He was precise and careful and occasionally too formal, which he would learn to calibrate, and he had an instinct for the silences in a room that Yara recognized as the thing that could not be taught, only possessed. The nomination was confirmed. Rajan sat in seat 48. It fit. The reception after the ceremony was held in the common atrium, the same space where Kwame had played for 2 hours, and 16 species had gathered. The atrium had a different quality now than it had 10 years ago. Things had been added to it, changed, adjusted, small marks of the various species that had used it over the years, which was how the whole station had been built, layer on layer, one thing added to another, over 11,000 years, until the result was something that had no clean name but was unmistakably itself. Yara stood near the viewport. The dead star outside gave no light worth mentioning. The station gave its own. Sora found her. Sora was still the enforcement delegate, largely retired from active enforcement now, more administrative, but still carrying the title and the presence of someone whose job had been to be the largest, most authoritative thing in most rooms she entered. She was slightly grayer in her exoskeleton plating than she had been 10 years ago. She moved the same way. She stood beside Yara at the viewport. "You made my job very inconvenient," Sora said. "I know," Yara said. They stood together. The atrium was full behind them. Humans and Ven and Keth and Dravani and a dozen other species moving through the same space, talking or not talking, in the specific way of beings who have grown used to each other's presence without making a ceremony of it. The silence between them was long, the kind that fit between people who had been through something and did not need to name it, the kind that was not empty. "The Charter," Sora said finally. "Article 3, Clause 9. You knew before you boarded that freighter." Yara looked at the dead star, held it. "I read the whole thing," she said, "twice." Sora was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. Yara looked at her. Sora was looking at the viewport, at the dark and the station's reflected light in the glass, at the nothing outside that they had made something in. "The Keth Trading Consortium," Yara said, quietly, not quite a question. "A legitimate registered entity," Sora said, "with full co-signing rights under Council transit law." "Of course," Yara said. She looked back at the viewport. Behind them, somewhere in the atrium, someone was playing music. Not Kwame. He had gone home years ago, had a family now, sent Yara a message every year on the anniversary of the concert. Someone else. Something with strings and a rhythm she did not recognize, from a species she could not immediately identify, filling the atrium with sound that had no name she knew, but which landed in her chest, the way music did when it was doing what music was supposed to do. She listened. Rajan was across the room, talking to the young Ven council member, who was no longer young in the way that the young became not young through the accumulation of what they had seen and done. They were talking the way two people talk when they have been figuring out how to talk to each other for a long time and have finally gotten somewhere. Yara watched them, felt something she did not try to name. It was too large and too quiet and too specifically itself to fit into a word. She had not wanted power. She had never wanted power. She had wanted a door open, and she had opened it, and people had walked through it, and people would continue walking through it for a very long time after she was gone. That was enough. That was, in fact, more than enough. It was everything. She stood at the viewport in the atrium of a station 11,000 years old, in a seat at the table she had not taken but had made possible, listening to music with no name she knew, while a dead star gave no light and the station made its own, and she thought, "We were always going to get here. We just had to read the manual." She smiled, small, just enough, the smile of someone who had done the work in small rooms over long years and did not need anyone to know it. She had done it anyway. That was the thing. That was always the thing.